Now, if you mark in your Bibles, underline that.
Hey, welcome back to another episode of the If You Mark in Your Bible podcast. My name is Josh, and today we're looking at Psalm 100, which we've titled The Happiest Excerpt. Looking at it with us today is David Smith. David preaches here in the Chattanooga area. I say here, in this area, the Chattanooga area. David, appreciate you coming on. How you doing?
Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
Yeah, definitely looking forward to this study. As we mentioned, we're looking at the Happiest Excerpt. Obviously, we all know that that's a subjective label. If you were to choose a passage to deem the happiest excerpt, what do you think you would have chosen?
It's tough because there's so many.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think off the top of my head, when you asked, my thought would be Philippians 4:4, rejoice in the Lord always, and again
Very
I say
good.
rejoice. But I think if you could take Psalm 100 and use that as sort of the explanation of Philippians 4:4, that's
interesting.
Yeah,
too.
so you get sort of the expanded form of it in Psalm 100. But I wouldn't deny that Psalm 100 is at least the happiest psalm in the Bible for sure.
Very good.
Yeah.
You're absolutely right. So as we mentioned, we're just looking at the psalm. It's a psalm of praise, a psalm of giving thanks. It's one that many are familiar with. It's not a more obscure psalm.
Yeah.
So, one commentator, and we'll leave it at this, calls it a counterclaim to false gods of Israel, to false gods. Whereas in Israel's God receives the joy and so forth. And I think that's right. There's when you look at kind of how the pagan gods affected the people, there was fear, superstition, that type of thing.
Yeah.
Whereas in here you have the real God's people, joyous to be servants of Him and having that relationship with Him.
Yeah. If you look at how miserable the people were under paganism, I think that's an apt description.
Yes, sir.
This is sort of the antithesis of that. So you get the source of joy, and then you get the actual benefit of what comes from the real God. So I could agree with that. I think that's an apt description of
Yes,
the
sir.
psalm. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, it was a good commentary. All right, so let's begin reading verse 1. Make a joyful noise to the Lord, all the earth. Serve the Lord with gladness. Come into His presence with singing. What do you have there?
I marked out just usually when I go through a text, I'll do different things with it. One, as a preacher, you always you're looking for points. How would you preach it? So I just put beside verse 1 jubilation, because I think that's what that verse is about. You get more into the reciprocation as you move down in the text, where he's talking about we're bound by what God gives us to do something in return to God. But this is more about the effect of it, the outward effect of it.
Right.
It's about the praise that comes out toward God. I think what's interesting here, he makes the point in verse 1 that it's the obligation of all the earth to do it.
Right.
He says, all you lands, or I think, marginal notes may say like all the earth. So obviously God's goodness is felt by all of creation. But I think when you get down to verse 3, I circled a long time ago in my Bible when it says we are His people. The only people capable of actually giving thanks to God in an appropriate way are His people. The earth is obligated to it, but only His people can actually do that. And I think it's an interesting connection to verse 3. I know we're not there yet, but the people making the shout to the Lord would be His people, because they're the only ones who really, truly understand, in the fullest sense in which it can be understood, what it is to experience the goodness of God and His mercy, like He talks about at the end of that passage.
I think that's interesting. I'm glad jubilation is a good way to describe this.
I think so.
I've underlined the three verbs: make,
Yes.
serve, and come, and put acts of thanksgiving in the margin. And that's gratitude is sometimes just I said thank you, but the reality is gratitude is more than just words that express the gratitude. There's, especially when it comes to the things that we're thankful to God for, there's action involved in it. There's an attitude. Sometimes you as a child, you want to thank or you're forced to thank somebody for something. And so, you technically thank them, but the attitude's not there.
That's right.
Here you have a joyful noise. There's attitude, service. There's the action, coming into His presence with singing. In other words, worship. And one thing that I was having a conversation with my buddy yesterday, actually, and he made the point, you don't have to convince a fisherman to go fishing. You don't have to convince a golfer to go golfing. That's something they enjoy doing. Why do we at times have to convince Christians to worship? In reality, that should be, it's an obligation, like you mentioned. It's the world is obligated to do it, but there should be a sense where we understand it as the privilege it is, and this is highlighting that. I'm coming into the presence of the Lord with joy. I'm happy about it. It's not, you don't have to drag me to do it. It's something that I'm willing to do, and if I don't get to do it, then I'm upset about it.
I always think of Psalm 116, verse 12. He asks, I assume it's rhetorical because he answers it in the next verse. He says, what shall I render to the Lord for all of his benefits toward me?
Great.
He's been so good to me. What can I do? And he follows it by saying, I'll take the cup of salvation, call on the name of the Lord. Of course, in the Old Testament, that calling on the name of the Lord has more of a worship context than anything. So he's saying, that's what I do to reciprocate the goodness of God. It's obligatory, but there's an attitude that moves us to do it, and I think you're exactly right. You may struggle to get folks in the world to understand that, but when you talk to a redeemed person, somebody said that has had the blood of the Lamb applied to their life, you should never have to twist their arm to get them to offer sacrifices of praise to God, because if you were lost and now you're found, you were lost and now you're a saved person, your life now should be characterized by going to the altar, so to speak, and making your offerings. It's what should be expected of a life that's been saved by God. So I appreciate your point. It's, as preachers, it's really frustrating when people just don't want to worship, and you think, how is that possible? Because if you've been convinced by the knowledge that you're saved from sin, then you're indebted to God for everything. And the way that we show that is by a life of faithful service, and the outgrowth of that would be faithful worship to God, regular faithful worship to God.
Absolutely. You're 100% correct. Let's begin reading verse 3. It says, know that the Lord, he is God. It is he who made us, and we are his. We are his people and the sheep of his pasture. Enter his gates with thanksgiving and his courts with praise. Give thanks to him. Bless his name. What do you have there?
Yeah, well, I had jubilation in verse 1, reciprocation in verse 2, and now verse 3, recognition. It's interesting. The word in verse 3 for knowledge is yada, right? So you go, sometimes it's used of sexual knowledge, right? Genesis 4:1, Adam knew his wife Eve. It's the same one, I think, Genesis 19, when you get down to like verse 6 or 7. The men of the city cried out, bring them out that we may know them. So you get a sexual context in some passages. But it's just the word generically, because of that means deep knowledge of God. Not superficial, like deep down knowledge of God. This is the one in Hosea chapter 4 when he says, my people are destroyed for lack of knowledge. Right? It's not that they didn't know about God. They just didn't really know him. And that's the word that's used here. And the principle here is brought out that it's real deep knowledge of God that comes through experience and fellowship. That's what produces this lifestyle of worship being reciprocated to God. And I think maybe that's part of the solution to the problem that you mentioned, which is, it's always a frustrating problem for elders and preachers in every congregation. How do you get people more plugged in? You got to get them in the Word. And the more they understand of God, the less likely they are to forsake returning thanks to him. Because if you really, truly know God, then you're going to worship him. You're going to say thanks to him for what he is. And that's what he's saying here. If you know deep down that the Lord is God, that he's the one that made us and not we ourselves, and then you're going to do something in response to that. And I think that's what we're going to have to start a revival of deep down knowledge of God to get people more in tune with that. But I love this point in verse 3, that it's not just superficial knowledge of God, but deep, intimate knowledge of God from experience and time with fellowship with God that breeds this attitude that I'm gonna spend time at the altar constantly with God.
Excellent. In fact, I circled the word know here in verse 3, and in my margin says appreciation grows with knowledge.
Absolutely.
They correlate with each other.
Yeah.
And in this instance, he's talking about creation. The fact that he knows you and I, he exists, and you and I know we exist because God created man, and we wouldn't be here if he wasn't. But take it to where we're at today, and you apply it from a principle standpoint. If you were to take that proverbial scale, and on that scale, you're going to put everything God did in order to acquire our salvation, redeem us from sin, and you look at everything he has asked us and required of us to come into that grace and to put on Christ, it's not even close. And there's a realization that you and I have no opportunity of ever matching what God has done on our account. And when you have that realization, it's one of those situations, I guess, where you see someone. It's when you see someone in a worse state than you are, and your problems start to seem smaller as a result. Yeah. When we start to compare what God did for our salvations versus what He requires of us, it's almost embarrassing to think that there's any portion of my life that I complain that I have to do any of it.
Yeah, just thinking through your comments there and what he says in verse 3. You've got this gratitude that basically frames every verse of this text through verse 5. I'm grateful. That's what the psalmist is saying. I'm grateful. That's what I'm doing. And I'm sitting here thinking, sometimes we run into, we ourselves could struggle with pride. Gratitude is what shatters pride. Because in verse 3, this is a humble man who's able to say, I'm not the shepherd, I'm just a sheep. And I'm not the owner of the people, I'm just part of the people. And there's that recognition here in verse 3 that I'm just grateful to be a sheep, and I'm grateful to be part of his people, but I'm not the one who's in charge. I didn't make myself. God made me, and he allows me the chance through his mercy to be a sheep. And as the humility grows and the gratitude is there, it shatters the pride. And I can, if I'm putting this together correctly, verse 3 is the basis for everything else in the text. The humility and the gratitude is what allows me to be the regular worshiper of God that I am. But if the pride is there, if I think I'm the owner of the people and I'm really the shepherd of the sheep, I'll never be the guy who serves and comes and makes, like you mentioned, those three verbs in verses 1 and 2. Right. So there's something very important about verse 3 to the entire psalm there.
Well, and knowledge is different. Knowing is different than just a acceptance of intellectual fact.
That's right.
There's a sense where it's knowledge that's garnered through experience. And I know for me personally, my appreciation for my parents increased when I got on my own and started having to buy my own groceries.
Sure.
And every now and then you go to an empty cupboard because I didn't go grocery shopping or whatever it was, and you start that magical pantry and refrigerator in my parents' house that always replenished itself. Yeah. I had an appreciation for what they did at that particular moment. Why? Because I experienced it. Same thing with God. Yep. We won't know everything to the extent that God knows, nor will we act or act to the extent that God is capable of acting. But there is a sense where you and I can gain knowledge, experienced type knowledge from God's perspective. And give an example is forgiveness. When someone offends us and we forgive someone, even though maybe it's difficult to forgive of that whatever offense, and then we reflect on it, we start to see, okay, that was hard for what they did and whatever. What do I do every time I sin? That's an offense against God. Yeah. And
experience is always that way.
Yeah.
And there's something about being on the inside versus the outside. I always think of the description of John in chapter 21 of Revelation, the holy city, and he describes the grandeur of it from the outside. And then he gets about halfway through that chapter and he switches gears and goes inside the city. And the view inside is totally different. It's even more luxurious than the outside. And no matter how people take that, whether the church or heaven, however it's taken, or the church as a view toward heaven, whatever, that there's still a principled point of it looks great from the outside, but to have experienced it changes your perspective of it. And I think this is to have experienced the goodness and the mercy of God, like he talks about in verse 5, to experience that changes your attitude toward it. It looks good from the outside, but it's really great on the inside.
Oh, that's an excellent point. And gratitude opens doors. Enter
Yes, it
his
does.
gates with thanksgiving. And you and I, have probably experienced it firsthand. Our children, when they're grateful for something, what does that drive us to do? It drives us to be more accommodative to the things that they do. Same thing at work. You thank somebody for an opportunity. You thank somebody for the job, and you just show gratitude. The thankful people are the ones who you like to be around. You want to give more opportunity to, because you know that they appreciate it. It's just I know an instance of a preacher basically just talking about giving somebody something out of the goodness of his heart, and then turn around and find it. And he made the point that he saw it in a pawn shop later on. He gave it to them for them to use because they needed it, and they turned around and pawned it off for money, and it made them angry. I mean, for obvious reasons. An act of benevolence turned around and kind of just squandered and that's the point he made. There was no gratitude in that action right there didn't show gratitude, and it makes them angry. The exact opposite's true. You show gratitude, you use it, you use that particular whatever's given to you for the benefit of other people. People are more inclined to reciprocate as well, 100%. Like you mentioned.
Yeah, it does breed or facilitate you wanting to do more of that. You want to help people who appreciate the help, but it doesn't last long when you get a very unappreciative person.
Right, very good point.
You don't want to do that. And I've been burned like that before. I'm sure you have too, where you try to help people because you really want what's best for them, and they're just taking advantage of your generosity. Fool me once, as the expression goes. Because I've got better things to do than waste time with people who are just abusing my benevolence. I want to give it to people who are really going to appreciate it. And I'm thankful God is a lot more patient, more understanding than me, and that He's not like that, because He makes the rain shine on or makes the sun shine on the just and the unjust. But I know for me, it's very difficult to continue to give somebody something who just throws it back in your face and squanders it. And this psalm is about a person who really gets it. This is from somebody who really understands how good God really is. And if you really understand it, it does something to you. It changes you as a person.
That's a good point. In fact, you see the wisdom in, is it Romans 12:10, with honor preferring one another? And the Greek there actually has that idea of outdoing one another. And I think that falls into this category. When you're thankful for something and you want to reciprocate, so you go to show the gratitude to a greater extent, and that thankful person, you see the wisdom in how the church grows and flourishes, relies on each other, bears one another's burden, rejoices with one another, when gratitude's at the center of it. We're thankful for what God did. We're thankful for the church that He put us in. We're going to contribute to it through action, through acts of thanksgiving, which we talked about in verse 1. And you see, and if society just as a whole would act that way, things would be different. It'd be a different world that we live in. More people been thankful for the things that they have.
Yeah, we're really blessed in so many ways, and I feel like sometimes our tendency, we fall in the trap of just thinking about the physical blessings, and we are richly blessed.
Absolutely.
To live in America, people who have ever been outside the United States can tell you quickly, there's nothing like what we have here. We're really blessed. Even the poorest among us are very, very rich, and we tend to think God is so good. Well, He is, but He's so much more than just the physical blessings we experience. And that He would offer His only Son for us, or that He would do what He did over time and be patient with men, it's humbling. It's just, we're so unworthy for what He's done. And that's why when you said Psalm 100, I thought, man, this is a great psalm, because it really is it's a punch in the gut if you're not doing this, to really take stock of the many things that God has done for us in His goodness, spiritually most of all, and to say, I think your point is so great, what you just said, to see whether or not I'm really truly giving back and reciprocating like I should. It's meant to be deep and earnest. It's meant to be lifelong. It's meant to be habitual and continual. This is not a one-off kind of a thing where we just, You send a Hallmark card and say, hey, thanks God for everything. It's just your life, everything about your life reflects how extremely grateful you are for what God has done. And I like that language that you used about trying to outdo. Of course, you can never outdo God because, He gives, the cup runs over. It's overflowing when He does. So you can never give thanks enough for that. But I know, based on everything the Bible teaches, He appreciates grateful people.
Absolutely,
I know He does.
absolutely. Verse 5 says, "The Lord is good. His steadfast love endures forever, and His faithfulness to all generations." What do you have there?
Well, to go back through my outline quick, I put jubilation, verse 1, reciprocation, verse 2, recognition, verse 3, prostration, verse 4. That's about worship. And then verse 5, comprehension. This is about the acknowledgement of something that God has historically verified time and time again, which is how good He really, truly is. He talks about His goodness, which is His loving kindness. That word's speckled all the way through the Old Testament, how God treats people better than He deserves to be treated. It would be very akin to the word grace in the New Testament. His mercy is that. It's His favor, His pity, and then His truth. He's got His goodness and mercy and truth all embedded in one verse, in verse 5. And I just thought, when He says He's good, His mercy is everlasting, His truth endures to all generations, my first thought was He's just sort of really calling our attention to the fact that these are historically verifiable things about God. Human history, at least the part especially that's recorded during the writing of the Bible, is full of the acts of God in human history. For us to say, I'm not curious about it, I'm not doubtful, He might be these things, it's for us to say, He is definitely, absolutely 100% good. And He is so merciful to mankind, and His truth is always there. He's faithful, and His revealed truth is just, it never wavers. That is so proven that there's not a reason why I shouldn't be involved in continual thanksgiving to God.
That's great. What's interesting about this is when you look at the verbs in the first 4 verses, all imperatives.
Yeah.
Next to this, I put imperatives rest on the indicative, and essentially this is the foundational phrase. Everything in verses 1 through 4 rest upon this. This is the foundation of it. And I just made this note. God has never expected us to act blindly, which so here we have these commands at the beginning of this passage, and again goes back to we should want to do them. There's an obligation, but it's also a privilege.
That's right.
It's a paradox to an extent, but the psalmist gives us the reason here. That's right. God has given us, before He asks us to be thankful, He's given us a reason to be thankful. And again with existence, but where we're at in the timeline of history, sending His Son to die on the cross, providing for us the opportunity at salvation, giving us His Word, which has enlightened us to not only how we can have the best life eternally possible, but also the best life we can live on earth during our time here. Yeah. So you take the mound of evidence that He's given to us, and then He tells us to be thankful and act thankfully as a result. And we talked about previous episode, the fool said in his heart, there is no God. That's right. I would argue that the fool has said in his heart that there's no reason to be thankful. You've touched on it extensively throughout this episode, that there's more than enough reason for us to be thankful. And the reality is me spending a lifetime to show God how thankful I am is still going to come up short in comparison to everything He's done.
Yeah, but it always scares me personally that I don't want to be the guy that forgets to do it. And I don't want it to be some, that it's some sort of repetitive phrase in my prayers without meaning. Thank you for everything you do, and it's just it's without meaning. There's too much in the Bible to remind us that it's easy to forget how good He is. You've got Proverbs chapter 30. You've got the guy who he's impoverished, so he steals, or he has too much and he forgets that God is the giver of gifts. And in either direction, it's easy to forget that God is the one who gives. You've got Luke 12. You've got a parable of a man who talks about everything except God. He's got the bigger barns, and he's talking about what he did. It's super easy to forget in this life that God is the giver of gifts. In fact, he's not just the giver of gifts. Was it James 1:17? It's every good and perfect gift. It's not only what he gives, but the way he gives it is absolutely perfect. And it's super easy to forget that in this life. And it can become just this phrase, we know we ought to do it, and we just say it, and it doesn't have any meaning. This psalm is reminding us it better have some deep meaning because of who he is. And I should be profoundly humbled because of what he's done for me, like you just said in history, all the wonderful things he's done in salvation, his patience and his mercy and his grace and his goodness and his justice and everything. I'm supposed to be a changed person if I'm experienced that. So that's what I'm getting out of this psalm.
No, excellent point. Brother Bobby Liddell one time made the point that we should be praying at not every prayer, but there should be a consistent prayer in our lives where all we do is offer gratitude to God. And he made the point, which you kind of just, okay, I agree with that. But he made this point, because typically when we think of prayer, it's going to God and asking him for something.
Supplication,
right?
Yeah.
And nothing wrong with that.
No.
But he's saying there should be a consistent portion of our life where we just thank God for everything that's going on. But he made this point. He said, if you look back on your prayer life in the last however many weeks or whatever, and you haven't done that, he said it's one of two things. You're either not thankful enough or you're not praying enough, which obviously both are issues. And I think this psalm captures that thought. That is something that I have personally just tried to, at least one of my prayers during the day, just offer thanks, not ask for anything, not request anything, just simply acknowledge God as who he is, and then thanking him. And I like the point you made too. I've tried to shift it more of thankful, not that I'm less thankful for the physical, but focusing more on things that aren't physical, if that makes sense.
That's right.
Do you have anything else before we close out?
No, I can't think of anything other than when you were talking, as a preacher, we probably all challenge people to do just that. Just thank God in one prayer. See how you do. And they'll come back and say, it's hard, without asking something. And so we have to train ourselves to do that. But I think the psalm reminds us, the more in tune we are with the nature of God, if we know him deeply, that he is every aspect of who he claims to be, it's all proven historically that he is that way, it makes you so much more appreciative. And that's supposed to be life. I mean, it's supposed to be in the way we serve him, in the way we worship him. Everything is about gratitude for what God has done. We cannot thank him enough. And then the more grateful we are, the more we transform as people, and the more winsome I think we become to the world. People are attracted to that. I think
absolutely. Michael J. Fox, in an interview, made the point, and this, he was, has Parkinson's and all that, and they said, how can you always remain optimistic? And he said, with gratitude, optimism is always a possibility. And I'm paraphrasing it, but I think you're absolutely right. If we're thankful, we are more attractive to other people because of that. So, David, thank you so much for coming on.
Josh, appreciate it.
Yeah, did a great job. To those who are watching, thank you so much. Appreciate your support. And until next time, keep studying.
Mark in your Bibles, underline that.